This is Drew Mackey, and you're listening to Singing Mountain. I'm guessing most listeners can identify the song that opened this episode, generally speaking. Yes, it's the Super Mario World melody, but more specifically, it's the version featured in Super Mario RPG. Titled Let's Play Geno on this soundtrack and arranged by the great Yoko Shimomura, it's one of the many examples of the Mario games paying homage to themselves and reusing an iconic melody to establish a sense of familiarity with the player. I actually thought about doing an episode that was all about these reworkings, but then I realized it could just be 90 minutes of all the different versions of the underground theme from the original Super Mario Bros., and I changed my mind. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's something anyone wants to listen to. Instead, I'm using that opening track as an example of the Marioverse's tendency to embrace a handful of songs and rework them and reinterpret them, and then let some other songs sit idle. Other ones that are also very catchy, and other ones that maybe deserve a second or third look, and other ones that just aren't what most people think of when they think of Mario music. These are the Super Mario B-sides. They're weird, or obscure, or underplayed, or underpraised, and I just want to give them a little moment in this episode. I'm not saying that I don't like these songs that Nintendo keeps revisiting. In fact, a lot of them get used and reused because they're really, really catchy. What I am saying is the songs in this episode hold up, and maybe they also deserve a chance to be included in Nintendo's go-to songbook. One quick note on my use of the term Marioverse. When I say this, I mean the expanded Marioverse. I mean all the Mario games, plus all the ones that star Yoshi or Wario or Donkey Kong or whoever else gets a spin-off now. You're going to hear songs from all these franchises in this episode. First up is a track from Super Mario Land, a game that's both very in line with the Super Mario series and a total outlier in that, aside from the promotion of Princess Daisy to the regular, go-kart, tennis, and golf crew, it hasn't really been revisited by Nintendo. It's an early Game Boy game, and largely the soundtrack sounds like that, but from the first time I ever beat the game, I always liked the ending theme. It's got some emotions that I don't think the rest of the game has, and I would actually say it was my top pick for a song that deserves some sort of reprise. So imagine my shock when I found out that it did get that. Just the one time that I know of, but more on that in a second. First, listen to the end credits theme to Super Mario Land, composed by Hirokazu Tanaka. So yeah, this was always in the back of my head as a Mario song I liked, and in doing some research for this episode, I was very surprised to find out that it did in fact get a single reprise. In Paper Mario Color Splash, released 27 years after Super Mario Land was released. A reworking of it is the ditty you hear when you win in the Roshambo Temple in that Paper Mario game. Have a listen. This is exactly the kind of callback I love, and I'm glad one of the 3 composers who worked on Color Splash also apparently had a fondness for Super Mario Land. It would be cool to hear more of the original Game Boy game's soundtrack reworked, but I suppose I will just take this little bit. The next song comes from a Mario Kart game, and I've always liked it even though the race course it's associated with is maybe one of the least remarkable in the series history. The game is Mario Kart Super Circuit, which came out for the Game Boy Advance in 2001, and the track is Riverside Park, which is basically just what it sounds like. Like most Mario Kart games, especially now, have these like very defined amusement park themes, but this is really just you're next to a river and that's it. The name is so boring that you probably actually just have a Riverside Park somewhere in your hometown. The music, however, is pretty good. On its own, it has this jungle vibe, but it also works as a synthesis of a lot of different Mario series elements all in one. It sounds like a Mario Kart theme, for one, but there's also this lead saxophone-like instrument you're going to hear that will probably remind you of the Donkey Kong Country series. And then there's also this trilling whistle noise you hear throughout the song that is a callback to a very similar one that you hear in the Calamari Desert music in Mario Kart 64. So I guess I'm saying these songs maybe deserve callbacks, but this song itself is a lot of callbacks slapped together, and that sounds like a reductive description, but it really works for me. Riverside Park has never reappeared in a subsequent Mario Kart game. And again, the course itself is just like a whatever. But I wouldn't mind hearing this music again. Here is that song from Mario Kart Super Circuit, which was composed by Kenichi Nishimaki, Matsunobu Matsunaga, and Minako Hamano. Similar to the way that the first Super Mario Land kind of just gave us Princess Daisy and that's it, Super Mario Land 2 gave us Wario, but almost everything else that originated in that game remained right there. Which is too bad because it's actually a great Mario game. I mean, I wouldn't be upset if it ever got remade on a modern console in full color. It was the first game to ever send Mario to the moon, 15 years before Super Mario Galaxy, I should point out, and up in the space area there's this one unique level called the Star Maze. and has the catchiest music. Have a listen to the Star Maze theme from Super Mario Land 2, 6 Golden Coins, composed by Kazumi Totaka. I love this track, and I think it might actually have a bit of a cult following among video game music nerds. As far as I know, it's never been reused in a Super Mario game, even though Mario goes to space pretty often now. Here's the weird thing though. It actually got reused in a song by Owen Pallett, a Canadian musician I learned about way back when through his association with the Arcade Fire. He used to perform under the name Final Fantasy, which he stopped doing, I think, for pretty obvious reasons. And in 2005, his debut album had a track called An Arrow in the Side of Final Fantasy that I will play a few seconds of for you right now.
Droughts been hard and the cows are all slaughtered, but my love for you needs no water. You miss your youth and you miss the city. Have no regret, have no pity.
It's crazy, right? Again, it's gratifying when someone else can recognize the charm in this old Game Boy composition that you've just been humming forever. Next up, a track from Yoshi's Woolly World, which is a soundtrack that seems to exist specifically to evoke nostalgia in me. The music for this game, composed by Tomoyo Tomita, Misaki Asada, and Kazumi Totaka, fits the peaceful, cute, and dare I say casual vibe for this game. But there's one track in particular that I can't hear enough of. It puts me in the headspace of my childhood and Charlie Brown specials and Schoolhouse Rock. I'd like to know if you can hear those influences too. Here is Spiky Stroll from Yoshi's Woolly World. I know I've brought up Wario Land 4 before. It's in the Spooky Mario episode from last Halloween. And I'm happy to talk about it again because it's a beautiful looking platformer that sounds great and represents the best version of Wario before Nintendo broke him. The whole soundtrack is great, and maybe I should do a whole episode about it now that I think about it, but I'm going to play just one track from it here. This doesn't sound like a Wario game, and though this title is a hop and bop platformer, it doesn't sound like platforming game music at all. It's pretty and peaceful and just sort of unexpected in any type of game, to say nothing of a Wario game. Have a listen to Monsoon Jungle from Wario Land 4, composed by Ryoji Yoshitomi. If you've been listening to this podcast for a bit, I'm sure you've heard me praise the name of David Wise, the composer behind the vast majority of the music from Donkey Kong Country. Of all his games, my favorite is Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, and one of the songs that I like the most is the end credits theme. It's what the end of a video game should sound like. And while it's probably the song from the game I've heard the least, because you only hear it that one time after you've beaten the game, and even then only for a few seconds, I still find myself humming it all these years later. So have a listen to the end credits theme from Donkey Kong Country 2, composed by David Wise. The Paper Mario games have become, I don't know if gimmicky is the word exactly, but they're different from what they used to be. Back when, they played a lot more like straightforward RPGs. I love those early games, but I worry that the paper cutout style may have turned off some people from playing them because they probably just thought they were for kids. And I guess maybe they might have been, but the music at least could sound as mature as any RPG, and I wanted to play one of those tracks on this episode. Composed by Yuka Sugiyoko and Taishi Senda, here is Jade Jungle from the original Paper Mario. I'm going to follow up with another jungle track, and the bold claim that the very first Mario Party game actually has really good music. No, really. Do you know who composed that game's soundtrack? Yasunori Masuda, the guy who did the soundtrack to Chrono Trigger. And in doing research for this episode, I realized that the game really does sound great. Next, I'm going to be playing the Jungle Board theme from this game. It's the one associated with Donkey Kong, so again, you're going to hear a little bit of David Wise's music in there, but knowing that the guy who composed Chrono Trigger is the person who made this track, close your eyes and try to block out any actual Mario Party associations, and see if you can actually hear a little bit of Chrono Trigger in there. I think I can. Maybe I'm reaching, but even if I can't, this song sounds a lot better than you might have expected. I don't really feel like Mario Party games are known for their music, but maybe this one should be. Here's Jungle Board from Mario Party 1 by Yasunori Masuda. So that track maybe came off as a little faux David Wise, but I've got another example of Wise's work interpreted in a way you probably haven't heard before. Before the original SNES Donkey Kong Country trilogy got remade for portable systems, the old school cream spinach color Game Boy had Donkey Kong Land, which was like the original Donkey Kong Country games, but also different, especially as far as level design went. They were in some ways their own separate games, just games that were inspired by the Super Nintendo trilogy. These games featured some original music, but also some reworkings of the original SNES soundtrack. And just because the Donkey Kong Land trilogy is all but forgotten today, I wanted to play the first Donkey Kong Land's take on what is probably the most famous of the Donkey Kong Country compositions, Aquatic Ambiance. Donkey Kong Land's music is credited to David Wise and Graham Norgate. I'm unsure if maybe Norgate arranged this David Wise original, but I couldn't find precise credits for the tracks. Regardless, here is Aquatic Ambiance from Donkey Kong Land. Another kind of forgotten Mario series is Game & Watch Gallery, which was a series of games for various portable systems that had Game & Watch games remade with Mario characters. Game & Watch Gallery 4 is the only one released for the Game Boy Advance, and it sounds the best. I'm going to play the theme to this game's take on Octopus, a Game & Watch title that should be familiar to anyone who's ever played as Mr. Game & Watch in Smash Bros. This track starts out happy and then gets into a classic video game style of intense. Here's Octopus from Game & Watch Gallery 4, composed by Ryu Kinugasa and Kengo Hagawara. One of the Mario themes that tends to get redone and redone in every Mario game is the original Super Mario World Ghost House theme. It's basically the template for almost every Mario track that has a creepy or supernatural element to it. In this episode, I want to introduce you to a track that goes in a different direction. The Mario vs. Donkey Kong games are the puzzle games that sort of look like the original Donkey Kong, but these little robotic toy Marios, the mini Marios, are a major gameplay element. Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2, March of the Minis, has haunted areas, but the music for them is jazzy and unlike the standard Mario Ghost theme. The track I'm going to play, Spooky Attic, is actually a remake of the Spooky House track from the original Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and I happen to think it's great. Here is that track, Spooky Attic, composed by Lawrence Schwedler. Back in 2005, Princess Peach finally got her own game. It was called Super Princess Peach, and it was problematic. I'm going to say problematic. Not only was it very easy, it was also beset with an awkward gameplay mechanic in which Peach got her superpowers from her rapidly cycling emotions. This is a dumb idea if you're giving your most famous female video game character her first starring role. So in case you took a pass on this game, either because you just heard it wasn't very good or maybe you thought it was a little sexist, I want to play for you the track from that game's fiery area, Fury Volcano. The overall game sounds light and cutesy, but this track has a lot of oomph to it. Here is Fury Volcano, composed by Akira Fujiwara. So full disclosure, I have never played a Virtual Boy game, and therefore have never really experienced Mario Clash, the big Mario starring title that Nintendo used to promote the Virtual Boy. But I figured if I was doing an episode about underappreciated Marioverse tracks, maybe Mario's Clash music was worth looking into. It's fine. I actually didn't know what to expect from the Virtual Boy sound-wise, and was surprised to find that it kind of sounds like a fancy Game Boy, which is to say that it also kind of sounds like certain Commodore 64 game music, which I've had on my brain since I did episode 21. I actually like the game's level 1 theme, Pipes, well enough that I can recommend it for a listen. So here is that track, composed by Ryoji Yoshitomi, who also did Wario Land 4. Enjoy. Something I did not know until I started working on Singing Mountain is that there is kinda sorta a lost Donkey Kong Country soundtrack that I didn't know about despite loving the original trilogy. You see, Donkey Kong Country 3, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble, is notable for being the one title in the original trilogy not chiefly composed by David Wise. Evelyn Fisher, who'd composed a few very good tracks for the original Donkey Kong Country, like Candy Kong's theme and Forest Frenzy, actually composed most of the stage music for Donkey Kong Country 3. It's not a David Wise project for the most part, and it doesn't sound like one for the most part. That's not to say that it's not good. Some tracks like Crystal Chasm, which I used back in episode 15, are actually quite good. Regardless, when this game was remade for the Game Boy Advance in 2005, it included a new soundtrack by David Wise, done very much in the style of his Super NES compositions. In the future, I think maybe I'll do a deeper dive into this game and compare its soundtrack with the original SNES soundtrack. It's not everyone's cup of tea, I realize, but I think some of Fisher's tracks actually hold up pretty well. But for now, because it's a quote-unquote lost soundtrack, I'm going to give you 3 songs, back to back to back. If you've never played the Game Boy Advance version of Donkey Kong Country 3, and you probably haven't maybe, then congrats, you're about to hear what is, to you, as far as you're concerned, brand new, old school Donkey Kong Country music that's just been hiding away on the Game Boy Advance for the past 13 years. The tracks I'm playing in order are Stilt Village, Mill Fever, and Enchanted Riverbank, parentheses, Underwater, all by David Wise. Next up, I'm going to play a track that I actually hated the first time I heard it. Today, it's grown on me, and I'm just kind of impressed that it exists, weird as it is. More than a year before the Donkey Kong Country 64 rap became a sort of beloved joke, Nintendo tried to introduce rap, or at least a rap-like jazzy thing, to another Nintendo series, Yoshi. Yoshi's Story, released for the Nintendo 64 in 1997, made liberal use of Yoshi's voice, which we'd never really heard before, and you hear it a lot on the soundtrack. In certain underground stages, however, the BGM is Yo-Yo-Yoshi, a track that has what I could generously call rapping. Again, when I was in high school, this seemed like Nintendo trying to be cool, but 20 years later, I actually think it is cool. Or at least weird enough to merit a mention. This track was composed by Kazumi Totaka, who also provided the voice of Yoshi, and in later games, that of Egad and even Birdo. So he's no stranger to literally putting his voice in the game, but I'm not clear if it's actually him rapping in this track. I would like to think that it is. Here is Yo-Yo-Yoshi, aka Jelly Pipe, from Yoshi's Story.
Yoshi, Yoshi, Yoshi. Yoshi, Yoshi, Yoshi. Yoshi, 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 Yoshi. Yoshi, Yoshi, Yoshi. Yoshi, Yoshi, Yoshi. Yoshi, 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 Yoshi.
As much as I don't like that Wario doesn't get to be in platforming games anymore, I do like the WarioWare games and the cast of weirdos that surrounds him in those games. Of particular note, musically speaking, is Jimmy T, an Afro-sporting hipster who kind of seems like a Nintendo version of Disco Stew, and who wants nothing more than to dance at Club Sugar, the dance club in Wario's hometown. In every WarioWare game, Jimmy hosts his own minigame segments, and the framing story around them is usually dancing-based. The Nintendo DS title WarioWare Touched is actually my favorite of the lot, and it has some of the best music. Have a listen to Dance Club Rub, Jimmy's theme from that game, composed by Masanobu Matsunaga and Yasuhisa Baba. One of the more unexpected Mario spin-offs of late is Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, which makes some very un-Mario-like gameplay make sense in the Mario universe. I mean, Captain Toad can't even jump. And what is a Mario game without jumping? Aside from the successful shift in gameplay, I like that the game didn't make Toad's Big Adventure sound cuter than it had to be. Your heroes are Toad and Toadette. That could get very smiley faces on everything very quickly, if that makes sense. One of the things that helps the game be less cutesy is a soundtrack that is very Wii U era and beyond, which is to say that it's well composed and not necessarily incessantly happy like Nintendo might have been in a previous era. I'm going to play for you a track that actually does a few things right. It's titled Blizzard on the Star Express. It's a train level, and I'm a sucker for train levels because of the music usually, just because they usually find a way to convey the sense of a train chugging forward, and I think you hear it in this song. Have a listen to Blizzard on the Star Express from Captain Toad Treasure Tracker by Naoto Kubo and Mahito Yokota. And that's it. When I started doing research for this, I knew I wouldn't have any trouble finding enough tracks for a single episode. What did surprise me is how quickly I ended up with about enough tracks for 2 episodes. So I think at some point I'm going to do a sequel. But I'm willing to admit that there are Mario or Donkey Kong or Yoshi or Wario games that I skipped over and that also have great songs that deserve a shout out. So I'm asking you, dear audience, to let me know what songs you like. If there's a lesser celebrated track from one of these series that I should feature, tell me about it. I mean, I have my list, but if there's something that's even better than what I've already gotten so far, I'm happy to amend and reshuffle and maybe even hold on to enough for a part 3 at some point. The easiest way to contact me online is via Twitter at DrewGMackey. It's MACKIE. You can also contact me through Singing Mountain's Facebook page, facebook.com/singingmountainpod. I also have an Instagram account for this podcast, also Singing Mountain Pod, where I essentially just post pixel art. So if you want more pixel art in your day, follow me there. You can subscribe to Singing Mountain on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. SoundCloud is where we're based, soundcloud.com/singingmountain. If you ever have any questions about a track name or want more information, it's all posted there. If you already subscribe to Singing Mountain, thank you. Please give us a rate and review. A rate and review is helpful to me because it makes it easier for other people to find this monument to nerddom. So please, if you haven't yet, give me some stars and some nice adjectives. If you make your review funny, I will read it in a future episode. I have one last track for you, and it's maybe a cheat since it comes from what is undeniably the biggest Super Mario game in years. I am talking about Super Mario Odyssey. However, I'll at least say that it's not anything Pauline sings, though for me it is the best track in the game. Maybe this has a big following online, I don't really know, but it's not one I've heard people talking about a whole lot, and I want to say a few nice things about it. It is the Steam Gardens theme, and I've already said how much I love David Wise, and will probably always talk about how much I love David Wise, but when I first heard this track, I couldn't help but notice how much it sounded more like a Donkey Kong Country track as opposed to a Mario track, even considering the wide variety of music in Super Mario Odyssey. So I suppose you can imagine how surprised I was when I looked up who composed it and found out that it was actually done by Koji Kondo, who's the grandfather of all Mario music and composed the original Mario theme and has done most of the composition for most of the major Mario games. I was ready to credit this new and different sound to one of the other composers who worked on this project, but it just goes to show that you shouldn't count Koji Kondo out after all these years. He can still surprise you and turn out a non-standard track that will end up becoming your favorite of the entire game. So here's Steam Gardens from Super Mario Odyssey, composed by Koji Kondo. See ya.